fragmented. The USB drive spun like a top on the oak desk. Claire's hands trembled as she plugged it into her laptop. What played on her screen, Arthur Vance handing an envelope to the sheriff, Polaroids of underage girls, including one that looked like a young Mia, would destroy her in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. By dawn, she would be framed for embezzlement. By noon, she would be hunted. By sunset, she would stand at the edge of a cliff, watching a man fall into darkness, her phone broadcasting it all to 14,000 strangers on the internet. But it started with the numbers. 11:42 p.m. Heavy rain hammering the window pane. Claire's index finger vibrated as it traced a column of red highlighted cells in the Excel spreadsheet. Her eyes were bloodshot, strained, the kind of tired that comes from 8 hours of staring at a screen without blinking. The HP laptop hummed its monotonous fan song. Rain drummed. Always the rain. Her left hand gripped a mug of cold black coffee. The coffee had gone bitter hours ago. She didn't taste it anymore. Next to the laptop sat a framed photo. Claire and Mia laughing at a lake 2 years ago, both of them golden in the afternoon light, both of them smiling like they had forever. She didn't look at the photo. She couldn't afford to break concentration. The numbers didn't add up. That was the problem. A $17,000 discrepancy in the Hope Harbor Charity's Q3 books. $17,000 meant nothing to most people. To Claire, it meant everything. She was a forensic accountant. Numbers were her language, and these numbers were lying. She reached for the physical ledger, the one bound in cracked black faux leather that sat on the shelf behind her desk. The ledger marked audit in faded gold lettering on the spine. She'd grabbed it almost as an afterthought, a hunch, really, while reviewing the digital files. Most auditors wouldn't have bothered with physical records anymore. But Claire wasn't most auditors. She shook the ledger. A small silver Kingston USB drive slipped out from the hollowed-out spine and clattered onto the oak desk, spinning like a top. The sound, plastic on wood, made her breath catch. What the hell is this, Mia? The question escaped her lips as a whisper. Mia worked at Hope Harbor. Mia was the nonprofit liaison, the face of the charity, the one who'd asked Claire to do the audit in the first place. Mia never lied. Mia was the person Claire trusted most in the world. Claire's hands shook as she plugged the Kingston into the USB-C port. The screen flickered. A folder opened instantly. The title made her stomach flip. Gift packages. She double-clicked. A video file labeled Board Meeting Uncut began to buffer. The progress bar crept across the screen. 12%, 25%, 50%. The video played. It was grainy. Surveillance footage, she realized, not professional recording. The image quality was poor, but not poor enough to hide what was happening. She recognized the basement of the Hope Harbor building immediately. The concrete walls, the metal shelving, the old filing cabinets in the corner. Arthur Vance stood in the center of the frame. The director, the man she'd met with just 3 days ago, the man who'd asked her to audit the books. He was handing a thick brown envelope to someone else, a man in a uniform with a badge visible on his chest. Sheriff Miller. They were talking. The audio was muffled, but she could hear fragments. Vance's voice. The shipment is clean. Miller's voice, lower, almost guttural. The usual amount? Then Vance turned, gesturing to the table behind him. On the table lay Polaroid photographs. Claire's breath stopped. The photographs showed underage girls, young girls. Some appeared unconscious. Some were bound. Her eyes scanned them quickly, desperately hoping not to find what she was looking for. There. Third Polaroid from the left. a girl with blonde hair and a delicate face. She was younger, maybe 17, maybe younger. She was tied to a chair. The face was unmistakable. Mia. But Mia was only 15 years old. Claire's stomach heaved. She slammed the laptop shut with a violent crack. The sound echoed through her home office. She stood so fast her chair tipped over, crashing against the hardwood floor with a heavy thud. The mug of cold coffee splashed across the desk, the dark liquid soaking into papers. Her fingers found her car keys on the shelf, the heavy Maglite flashlight. She didn't think about what she was doing. Her body had taken over. Survival mode, flight response. Get to Mia. Find Mia. Make this stop. Outside, the rain fell harder. The Subaru tires screamed as Claire skidded into the gravel lot of the Victorian-style charity building. Gravel sprayed against the fender in a violent arc. She killed the lights and sat in the darkness, her breath fogging the windshield in rhythmic bursts. 12:15 a.m. The Hope Harbor sign swayed in the wind above the entrance, creaking on its old hinges. A light was on in the back, the director's office. She could see it from the parking lot, a dull yellow glow through frosted glass. Claire sat for 3 seconds, 10 seconds. The rain continued its assault on the roof of her car. She got out. The gravel crunched under her boots as she approached the glass front doors. Everything felt unreal, like she was walking through someone else's nightmare. Her hands were clenched so tightly, her nails drew blood from her palms. The door turned from the inside before she could reach for the handle. Arthur Vance stood there, perfectly groomed despite the hour, despite the rain. His silk tie was knotted precisely at the center of his chest. His dark hair didn't have a single strand out of place. He smiled, but his eyes were cold stones. Claire, I didn't expect the audit to require midnight visits. His voice was smooth. It was the voice of a man used to lying. She'd met him before, 3 times in the past year, and each time she'd missed what was right in front of her. Where is Mia? The words came out jagged, fractured. Vance stepped out through the door, closing it behind him. The lock clicked with a heavy, final sound. He leaned in closer than was comfortable. His scent reached her, expensive sandalwood overlaid with the smell of old paper. The smell of a man who spent his time in offices, surrounded by files, surrounded by secrets. He held up his phone. On the screen was a photo. It was Mia, but not trapped, not bound. Mia was standing in Vance's office, standing freely, laughing at something or someone out of frame. Her arm was linked through Vance's. She looked happy. She looked complicit. She was so worried about you coming here tonight, Vance said, his voice dripping with mock concern. You should have stayed home, Claire. Something shifted in Claire's chest, a shattering feeling. But there was no time for that now. No time to process the implications. No time to understand the betrayal. She pivoted on her heel, her rain boots splashing into a deep puddle. Water soaked through the leather, but she felt nothing. She sprinted back toward her car. Behind her, she heard Vance laugh. It was a short, dry bark of amusement, the sound of a man who had already won. The Subaru roared down the narrow 2-lane road. Rain hammered the windshield. The wipers beat their rhythm, on and off, useless against the torrent. Claire's hands were welded to the steering wheel. In the rearview mirror, 2 blinding circles of light appeared, a massive black Cadillac Escalade. Gaining fast. Claire pressed the accelerator harder. The engine screamed at 5,000 RPM. The Subaru was built for hiking trips and coastal roads, not for this kind of pursuit. The Escalade was built for exactly this. 12:25 a.m. The road was empty. The night was absolute. The Escalade rammed her rear bumper. The impact was catastrophic. Claire's entire body jolted forward, her head snapping back against the headrest with a brutal crack. Metal crunched on metal. The sound of her taillight exploding filled the cabin. Red plastic shards flew into the air, swept away by the rain. Claire yanked the steering wheel to the right. The Subaru skidded off the road, crashing through thick brush. Branches whipped the windshield. She felt them like claws. The car slammed into a maple tree with a sound like the world ending. The airbag deployed with a muffled pow. White dust filled the cabin. For a moment, Claire couldn't see anything, couldn't breathe. The airbag smelled like chemicals and burning plastic. Then the dust began to clear. The door was wrenched open. A man in a tactical mask reached in to grab her. Black fabric covered his entire face. Only his eyes were visible. But his hands were bare, his fingers strong. Claire gripped the heavy Maglite flashlight with both hands. She swung with everything she had. The impact was like swinging a club into meat. The man's head snapped sideways. A spray of blood hit the white airbag, spattering it like a Jackson Pollock painting. He recoiled with a grunt of pain, his eye socket already swelling where the flashlight had connected. She scrambled out of the passenger side. Her boot found mud. She fell hard, her palms hitting the ground, skin tearing. But she was moving. The second man was rounding the hood of the car. She saw him coming, dark clothes, gloved hands. She kicked. Her boot connected with his groin. He doubled over with a wheeze. She didn't wait to see if he went down. She was already running, already diving into the dark woods. Behind her, a flashlight beam swept through the trees, illuminating rain-slicked bark and twisted branches. She ran deeper into the darkness. 2 a.m. The hunting cabin sat abandoned in the woods, its wooden frame weathered gray by decades of rain and wind. Claire had found it by accident, a structure that was barely even a structure anymore, more like a collection of boards and memories held together by rust and habit. She sat on the floor, using her phone's light to see. The dirt beneath her was cold. In front of her sat a rugged laptop, an old ThinkPad she kept in her trunk for emergencies. Emergencies like this. Her hands were caked in dried mud and blood. She wasn't sure which blood was hers. The cuts on her palms burned. Her ribs ached where something hard had connected with her body. She plugged the USB drive into the laptop. The files opened. She didn't start with the videos this time. She opened the file titled Payroll. What she found made her breath stop. It wasn't employee payroll. It was a list. The city's elite, the mayor, the judge, the local bank CEO. Next to each name were entries. Donation, $50,000. Donation, $75,000. Donation, $100,000. The dates spanned back 5 years. The total came to $3.2 million. It's the whole damn town. The words escaped her as a hollow rasp. She opened another file. Training log. A video began to play. It showed Mia, not a victim this time. Mia was walking freely through Vance's office, laughing, completely at ease. She was handing Vance a piece of paper, a list, names on the list. Her eyes scanned them frantically until she found her own. Claire Bennett, circled in red. Below it, Vance's voice on the video. This one? Mia's response, casual, almost cruel. She's thorough. She'll find everything. Then we let her find exactly what we want her to find. Claire's phone vibrated on the floor. A text from an unknown number. I see your light, Claire. She looked at the window. A red laser dot was dancing across the dusty floorboards, moving like a serpent, heading directly for her chest. Time compressed. She dove to the side, just as a bullet shattered the window. Glass shards sprayed through the air like diamonds through darkness, reflecting her phone's light as they fell. A second shot punched through the wall behind where she'd been sitting. She grabbed her laptop and slid into the crawlspace under the floorboards. The space was barely 2 feet high. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, could hear the wind whistling through the new hole in the cabin's wall. Outside, she heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate. Someone was approaching the cabin. Claire was sliding down a muddy embankment, her fingers clawing at the wet earth, leaving deep grooves in the soft ground. Roots tore at her clothes. Branches scraped her face. She rolled at the bottom and fell into a shallow creek, the water shockingly cold, stealing her breath. 3:15 a.m. The ravine was a wound in the earth, dark and hostile. Above on the hillside, flashlight beams swept through the trees. She could hear voices calling to each other, coordinating. 2 men, maybe 3. She didn't stay to find out. She scrambled down the creek bed, using rocks to pull herself forward, her movements silent. The water was icy. It numbed her injuries. It also numbed her thinking, which was a problem. Behind her, a figure descended the embankment. Tall, dark parka. He was holding a rifle. Not an ordinary rifle. This one had a suppressor attached to the barrel. The kind of gun that didn't make noise. The kind of gun used for people who needed to disappear. He stopped, looking at the drag marks she'd left in the mud. He kicked a rock into the creek. It splashed. Claire rose from the water behind him, a jagged rock clutched in both hands. She lunged. The rock connected with the back of his knee. The impact was sickening, a wet crunch of joint and ligament. He buckled, his leg giving out completely. The rifle fell from his hands. He turned toward her, and she saw his face for the first time. Mid-40s, scarred, professional. The face of a man who did this kind of work regularly. As he turned, she swung the rock again. This time it connected with his temple. His eyes rolled back. His body went slack. He fell into the shallow creek and didn't move. Claire stood over him for 1 second. 2 seconds. His blood was mixing with the water, swirling downstream. She didn't check his pulse. She picked up the rifle and waded deeper into the creek, moving away from the body, away from the flashlight beams, away from everything. The gun was heavy, real. It smelled like gun oil and violence. She didn't know how to use it, but she carried it anyway. 8 a.m. The morning light was harsh and unforgiving. The local library was bustling with people, teenagers with homework, seniors checking email, a few people like Claire who had nowhere else to be. She wore a stolen hoodie to hide the blood. Her hands trembled as she sat at one of the public library computers. The hoodie was pulled low over her face. She looked like someone trying to hide, which was exactly what she was. She tried to log into her cloud drive. A red error message appeared on the screen. Account suspended. Law enforcement protocol. Her fingers froze. She typed Internal Revenue Service Report into the search bar instead. The screen spin-cycled. Loading. Loading. The little rainbow wheel of death. Then something happened that she'd never seen before. Every computer in the library simultaneously turned off. Every single monitor went black at the exact same moment. Not a power surge. Something deliberate. A coordinated shutdown. The librarian looked confused. A teenager cursed. An old man stood up frowning. Claire stood and walked out. She didn't run. Running would attract attention. But her heart was a hammer in her chest, and she couldn't breathe. They had access to the library system. They could kill the power on all the machines at once. How much access did they actually have? She thought about her email, her bank accounts, her home, everything digital, everything exposed. She walked into the street and didn't look back. Noon. Bright sun. The town square during Founders' Day festival was a study in contradiction. Children eating cotton candy, blue and yellow balloons swaying in the breeze, a brass band playing on the bandstand. A massive banner proclaimed, Founders' Day, celebrating 140 years of Hope Harbor. Claire was walking through the crowd, blending in, trying to disappear into the mass of families and well-wishers. Her stolen hoodie was gone. She'd ditched it hours ago. Now she wore a tank top and sunglasses, trying to look like anyone else, trying to look like no one. Sheriff Miller stood on the bandstand, clapping for the mayor. She saw him, and her body went cold. Not the ordinary cold of fear. The cold of inevitability, like watching an accident in slow motion. Miller's eyes found her in the crowd. He didn't pull a gun. He didn't rush toward her. He simply pointed at her and spoke into his radio. Within 30 seconds, 4 uniformed deputies began to converge from different corners of the square, moving like a net. Like they'd practiced this exact scenario a dozen times. A woman stepped out from behind the sheriff. It was Mia. She looked perfect. No bruises, no rope marks. Her hair was styled. Her makeup was immaculate. She pointed at Claire and shouted, her voice magnified through the PA system that had been playing the brass band music moments before. There she is. She's the one who stole the money. The crowd turned as one. Every face, every pair of eyes, all directed at Claire. Mia's voice continued, shrill and public-facing, ringing through the square. Claire Bennett is a thief. She's been embezzling from the children. The crowd began to murmur. A woman gasped. A man moved toward Claire as if to stop her from running. Claire stood paralyzed. Her legs felt like lead. Her entire body had turned to stone. The realization was atomic. The found ledger was planted. Every piece of evidence she discovered was carefully constructed, carefully placed for her to find. She'd been walking through a maze designed specifically for her, and she'd never suspected the walls were closing. Mia's eyes met hers. For a moment, she saw the truth flicker across Mia's face. Not triumph, not cruelty, just the cold practicality of a girl who had made a choice about survival and who had chosen herself. The deputies were close now. 2 p.m. The processing room at the sheriff's station was a small concrete box with no windows, fluorescent lights that hummed like insects, and a metal table bolted to the floor. Claire was cuffed to the table. Her wrists were already raw where the metal had been rubbing against her skin. There was dried blood between her fingernails from where she'd tried to scratch the cuffs open. Sheriff Miller entered, holding a plastic bag. Inside the bag was a syringe. He locked the door behind him. The click was decisive. A tragic overdose, Miller said, his voice dead and flat, the voice of a man reciting lines he'd rehearsed many times. The guilt of stealing the charity funds was just too much. You couldn't live with what you'd done, so you came here to turn yourself in. But instead, you took the easy way out. He set the plastic bag on the metal table. The syringe was large. The fluid inside was dark amber. You have any last words? Miller asked, and there was something almost bored in his tone. This was routine for him. Claire's mind splintered, but underneath the fear, something crystalline formed. Rage. Pure, focused, terrible rage. As Miller leaned in to grab her arm, she slammed her forehead directly into his nose. The impact was violent. A loud crack of nasal bone breaking. Blood erupted from his nostrils, hot and sudden. She didn't stop. Using the force of the collision, she threw her upper body weight against the metal table, driving her shoulder forward. His hand, the one reaching for her, got pinned between the table and the wall. He screamed. a high, thin sound. Claire moved with instinct and desperation. Her cuffed hands reached for the keys on his belt. Her fingers were slick with his blood. They slipped. She tried again, found the key ring, fumbled with the lock. Miller recovered, his other hand coming around to grab her throat. She couldn't breathe. The pressure was enormous. Her vision began to darken at the edges. Her eyes felt like they were being pushed out of her skull. But she'd already freed one of her hands. She reached for the desk, found the heavy stapler sitting there. She picked it up and began to slam it repeatedly into the side of Miller's head. Each impact made a dull thud. His grip on her throat loosened slightly. She hit him again, and again. His ear began to bleed profusely. His grip failed. Claire kicked upward with everything she had, driving her heel directly into his throat. He staggered back, choking, making sounds like a wounded animal. His hands flew to his neck. Claire scrambled toward the back exit. There was a door at the end of the hallway. She could see the outline of daylight around the edges. She pushed through it and ran. The hallway was empty. The station behind her was in chaos. People shouting, phones ringing. Miller's gasping, choking sounds echoed from the interrogation room. She pushed through the back door and emerged into an alley. Rain had started again. She didn't know what day it was anymore. Time had become meaningless. She ran. 6 p.m. The town's radio tower stood on the highest point of land for miles around. Claire had climbed it, actually climbed the metal lattice structure, because it was the last place anyone would look. Because up here, at 200 feet above the ground, the air was thin and clear, and she could see everything. The sun was setting. The sky was a bruised orange, threatening rain. Below, she could see the town laid out like a game board. Hope Harbor, the charity building, the police station, the library. All of it part of the same machine, footsteps on the metal platform. Arthur Vance emerged first, followed by Mia. They walked slowly, carefully, like people approaching a cornered animal. Vance's suit was immaculate. Mia was still wearing the clothes from the festival. "It's over, Claire," Vance said. His voice carried no emotion. "You're standing on a radio tower 200 feet up. There's nowhere to go." He was right. Claire stood at the edge of the platform. Behind her was a 200-foot drop. In front of her were Vance and Mia. Beside her was the massive metal radio tower, its wires humming with transmitted signals. Mia reached into her pocket and pulled out something small and silver. She held up the USB drive, the one Claire had plugged in, the one that contained everything. Mia smiled and dropped it on the concrete. She positioned one of her designer stilettos over the drive and pressed down with her full weight. The plastic cracked. The internal chip snapped in half. Fragments scattered across the platform. "You always were too good for this town, Claire," Mia said, her voice cold and mocking. "Now you're just part of its history." But Claire was smiling. The smile was strange on her face. Bloody, pink-stained teeth, but genuine. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. The screen was showing a live broadcast interface. The numbers at the bottom made Vance's face drain of all color. "Live, 14th and a 302 viewers." "I'm a forensic accountant," Claire said. Her voice was steady, sharp, victorious. "I never keep only one copy. I've been streaming this since the police station." Vance lunged at her. His foot slipped on the gravel. For a moment, he was airborne, his body suspended in the space between safety and oblivion. His phone was in his hand, and even as he was falling, it was lighting up with notifications. National news headers, Twitter, Reddit, news anchors reading his name. He looked at his own phone as he fell. The moment lasted exactly 3 seconds. Mia's scream was inhuman, a sound of pure animal terror. She tried to rush to the edge, but Claire stepped in front of her. "You had a choice," Claire said. Mia's face crumpled. "I had to, Claire. They would have killed me too." Claire didn't respond. She turned away from Mia and walked toward the metal stairs that led down from the platform. She didn't look back. 7 p.m. The platform was now surrounded by FBI. Red and blue lights strobed through the darkness. Agents in dark jackets moved with swift, practiced efficiency. Mia was on her knees, hands behind her head, surrounded by men with assault rifles. Mia looked at Claire as she passed, her eyes filled with a desperate plea. "I had to," Mia whispered again. Claire didn't break stride. She walked to her car, the damaged Suburban they'd recovered from the woods, now surrounded by crime scene tape. She opened the passenger door and reached into the glove compartment. She pulled out the framed photo, the one of her and Mia laughing at the lake. Both of them golden, both of them smiling like they had forever. She held the photo for exactly 5 seconds. Then she dropped it into the mud beside her boot. The glass frame cracked. She stepped on it once, deliberately, and crushed the remaining glass beneath her heel with a final, sharp crack. The photo disappeared into the grime. She walked away from the crime scene, away from the flashing lights, away from Mia's sobs and the agent's shouted questions. She walked down the overlook road toward the highway. A black SUV was waiting at the turnoff. Not Vance's, something different, newer, government issue. A man in a dark suit opened the driver's side door. His face was blank. He didn't introduce himself. He simply gestured for her to get in. She climbed into the passenger seat. The engine was quiet, expensive. The leather seats smelled like nothing, professionally cleaned and sterile. As they pulled out onto the highway, Claire watched the sunrise beginning to light the eastern sky. Orange light spreading across the horizon. She didn't look back at Hope Harbor. She didn't look at anything. The man in the suit drove. Neither of them spoke. The radio played NPR News, already covering the story, already naming names, already beginning the long process of dismantling the system she'd exposed. The car drove on into the sunrise, into whatever came next. The end.